Everyone, welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. I'm your host, Ari Witten, and today I have with me, for the second time on the podcast, Dr. Izabella Wentz. She is a doctor of pharmacology and a internationally acclaimed thyroid specialist and licensed pharmacist who has dedicated her career to addressing the root causes of autoimmune thyroid disease after being diagnosed with Hashimoto's thyroiditis in 2009. Dr. Wentz is the author of the New York Times bestselling patient guide, Hashimoto's Thyroiditis, Lifestyle Interventions for Finding and Treating the Root Cause, and the recently protocol-based book, Hashimoto's Protocol, a 90-day plan for reversing thyroid symptoms and getting your life back. As a patient advocate, researcher, clinician, and educator, Dr. Wentz is committed to raising awareness on how to overcome autoimmune thyroid disease through the Thyroid Secret documentary series, the Hashimoto's Institute practitioner training, and her international consulting and speaking services offered to both patients and healthcare professionals. So welcome yet again for number 2, Dr. Izabella Wentz.
Ari, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, likewise. Always a pleasure to chat with you. And also, I should add to my introduction, also a personal friend of mine, which is always nice to have my buddies on the podcast. So to start us off, I also want to talk about this, which is your new book, Hashimoto's Food Pharmacology. And we're going to be talking a lot about this. This is basically a dietary guide and cookbook for people with Hashimoto's. And so we're going to dig into some of the specifics of the best nutrition approaches to dealing with Hashimoto's for people who have it. But first, I would love if you could introduce sort of yourself, just talk a bit about your background. And you yourself actually have Hashimoto's, so you have some personal sort of vested interest in finding answers and solutions here. So just tell me about your background and your experience and your kind of story with Hashimoto's.
Sure. So in full disclosure, I was never interested in the thyroid during pharmacy school. I always thought that if you had a thyroid condition, you either got pills to make more of it or pills to make less thyroid hormone, right? And it wasn't really until I graduated from pharmacy school and started having more and more symptoms with every passing year and was diagnosed myself with Hashimoto's and an underactive thyroid is when I really became interested in thyroid. And when I really understood the complexity of thyroid conditions, and really at that point is when I understood that most thyroid conditions were caused by an autoimmune condition. So this is sort of how I became a Hashimoto's expert / human guinea pig, was really through my own diagnosis and taking my background as a pharmacist and using the research methodology I developed as a consultant pharmacist, working with people with very rare conditions, sometimes rare genetic conditions where only 10 cases had been described in the world. And so a lot of times for my clients, I was used to digging into the medical research and patient forums and PubMed and just trying to find something that might work for them. And what was really amazing with my client work before I became the thyroid pharmacist was that a lot of these clients of ours, they were given things to do by their doctors that not only didn't help them, but oftentimes would harm them. And just to give you one example, we'd have some children who had cerebral palsy, and the doctors would oftentimes see the children were making noises or screaming, and they would say, let's give this child an antipsychotic medication because clearly he's got a behavior issue. And a lot of times, the team I was part of, we would look at and try to figure out what was actually going on with that particular individual. And many times it was pain or some sort of other kind of imbalance that they were having. And we would utilize physical therapy and other types of therapies to resolve that pain. And then, that person was no longer screaming, or that person was no longer, quote unquote, having behaviors. And we would be able to avoid the use of psychotropic medications. And so to make a long story short is I was seeing that doctors didn't always know everything. And I thought maybe there was more to Hashimoto's than just taking thyroid medications, which of course I'm a fan of thyroid medications, but we can't expect just one thing to heal us. As you know, a lot of times it's a combination of lifestyle that really creates that profound healing in the body.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to zoom out and just, for people who are not familiar with this condition, talk about sort of what it is, what Hashimoto's is, and how prevalent it is, and what's, well, I'll actually save the next layer of questions for after those questions.
So Hashimoto's is an autoimmune condition that affects the thyroid gland. And what is happening in very simple terms is the immune system starts to recognize the thyroid gland as a foreign invader and starts to attack the thyroid gland. This eventually results to the thyroid gland not being able to produce thyroid hormone, and we end up with an underactive thyroid or hypothyroidism. And there's a lot of consequences to that. We can talk about that a little bit more. And the key thing here, I guess, is that it's a very common condition. So we're looking at anywhere from 10 to 20% of the general population might have this condition, depending on which studies are done. There are some studies that only uncover the late stages of the condition, and this is going to be the TSH test that most people, when they suspect they have a thyroid condition, they'll go to their doctor, and their doctor will do this test, and that will usually pick up just the very late stages of the condition. When we do more advanced diagnostic testing, we can pick it up the condition in a far earlier stage, make a lot more interventions to prevent some of that damage, and then we also find that the condition is far more prevalent.
And that ability to pick things up early is pretty critical here, because there is an actual destruction of the thyroid gland going on. So the longer that takes place, the less likely you are to, even if you get to a place where you are doing things that are effectively slowing or stopping or potentially reversing the thyroid destruction, I would imagine it's much harder to end up with a fully functional thyroid gland if you're starting that much later in the progression of the disease.
You're absolutely right. It's much more easier to prevent the damage to the thyroid gland than it is to try to regrow a thyroid gland. I'm not saying it's not possible to regrow a thyroid gland. I'm never going to hold back that from people, but majority of people who are discovered to have thyroid conditions in the late stages will need some sort of thyroid hormone replacement. Mm-hmm. And that is, as a pharmacist, that I'm a big fan of using appropriate hormones and appropriate medications when they're indicated.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would love if we could talk about the sort of conventional thinking on the causes of Hashimoto's, within conventional medicine, and their approach to treatment, and then contrast that with what you're doing and how sort of the more functional medicine or holistic based paradigm of what's going on in Hashimoto's.
I think a really big focus of conventional medicine is genetics. And a lot of times they'll say, well, you've got these genes and your mom had it, so therefore you're going to have it. And I feel like there's a lot of great research going into that. Mm-hmm. And, unfortunately, I feel like that's not very empowering, because we can't really do anything to get different genes than the ones we have, at least not in this day and age. And it's also not super accurate. Given the right types of conditions, we can actually see really, really high rates of Hashimoto's. I personally was downstream from Chernobyl, the nuclear fallout. And that to me, I believe that was part of my triggering root cause, where people who were closer to it, there were crazy statistics with up to, I want to say 80% of children within a certain age range, within a certain radius of that incident, that ended up having Hashimoto's. Mm-hmm. So it's you can say that it's genetics all you want, yet children that were genetically similar, further away from that nuclear disaster, did not have Hashimoto's at those high rates. So this is where I think functional medicine and lifestyle medicine is so important, because we really look at what are some of the triggers in our own environment that can bring on disease, and how do we modify these triggers? How do we maybe, we can't really avoid everything, right? We can't live in a bubble, but what can we do to modulate or modify that?
Mhm.
And so from a functional medicine standpoint, toxins would be a huge one. Food sensitivities, nutrient deficiencies, chronic infections, impaired ability to handle stress, impaired ability to handle toxins, as I think I mentioned at the beginning, but also gut issues is going to be another one. To contrast the functional medicine approach to the conventional medicine approach, conventional medicine is basically you have this condition, we know you have it, and if your thyroid has burned itself out completely, we'll give you thyroid hormones. We'll check you every few years for additional autoimmune conditions. But that's kind of it, right? And if you have depression, if you have hair loss, if you have joint pain, we'll send you to the respective specialist. So for depression, you'll go to a psychiatrist. If you have, joint pain, maybe a rheumatologist, maybe a dermatologist for hair loss, whatnot. With functional medicine, our goal is to figure out what caused that condition and how do we modify it, right? So we're looking at using food as medicine. We're using nutrients, digestive enzymes. We're replenishing thyroid hormones and if appropriate, and just trying to figure out, is it an infection in your thyroid or is it an infection somewhere else in your body that's causing you to be out of balance? If that's the case, great, let's get rid of it and help you feel your best, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Within some of the evidence-based sort of skeptic circles, the people who think everything outside of conventional medicine is quackery and nonsense, there's a sort of idea that they have that anyone who mentions toxins or detoxing is a quack who doesn't understand any of the science. So I just to ask you very directly, is there any evidence on any specific toxins and links to autoimmune conditions? And can you speak to that a bit?
Yes, and just in full disclosure, I'm a trained pharmacist, so I came from a very skeptical standpoint. And everything that I talk about now, if you told me this 10 years ago, I would have been like, no way. And it's like, the more you research, the crazier you appear, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there are a ton of...
I will say that there are some genuinely crazy people, though.
There are genuinely crazy people out there. I hope that I'm not one of them yet.
Yeah,
maybe with more research I will be, right?
Yeah, well, I'd say there's a category of genuinely crazy people, and then there's a category of really knowledgeable experts who appear to be crazy by many people in the sort of conventional circles.
I will say coconut oil is great, but it'll not cure your thyroid. So there's stuff out there like, this one thing will cure your thyroid. That's not what I'm talking about. But yeah, there are various types of chemicals that have been connected. The halogenated, brominated chemicals are some of the biggest ones that have been implicated. I could really give you a lot of research and citations. I have, I think maybe 600 for my first book and maybe 200 for my second book that really detail various types of chemicals. And it goes as far as people who are, within a closer radius to factories of this sort are going to have higher rates, and people growing up of Hashimoto's, people growing up in bigger cities have higher rates of Hashimoto's. Chernobyl, I guess, is the most well-studied one. Mm-hmm. And we know that people who were closer to that had the highest rates of thyroid cancer, as well as what they call, benign thyroid disease, which anybody with a autoimmune thyroid condition will not say it's benign. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so we have a lot of really clear research that can connect various toxins to Hashimoto's. Mercury is another one with people who have mercury fillings. I really could give you a long list of those, and if
I know you have
be interesting
books. I've read books. I mean,
I'm
fluoride and BPA and a whole bunch of things. I'm curious. Do you have any thoughts on is there research on sort of fluoridated drinking water and the incidence of Hashimoto's?
There is some research with the incidence of thyroid disease. The last time I checked, it wasn't specific to Hashimoto's, but there was one interesting kind of study that was done in the UK. In the UK, they fluoridate some parts of the communities and other parts they don't. And they found that in the parts of the UK where the water was fluoridated, presented with higher rates of Hashimoto's
Mm-hmm.
compared to the parts of the country where they did not. What's also interesting is like the higher levels of fluoridation in that community, the higher rates of thyroid disease. So definitely, I feel like it deserves a lot more research. So there are definitely some connections there. Another interesting one that we don't typically think of, and fluoride is one of those public health interventions that's meant to help us, right? Like, yeah, we don't want people to have rotten teeth. Let's give them fluoride. Another wonderful intervention, or I'm being a little sarcastic, is iodine. We used to have the highest rates of thyroid disease due to iodine deficiency. And so public health officials began to add iodine to our salt supply. Now, this was great for ending the high levels of iodine deficiency hypothyroidism, but unfortunately it was recognized that iodine is a narrow therapeutic index nutrient. So some people were getting too much of it, and that was causing thyroid disease as well. So, in my book, Hashimoto's Protocol, I have a whole chapter, and it's actually the very first chapter. It just talks about liver support and some of the different types of toxins that have been connected to thyroid disease. And like I said, we can't really live in a bubble. And so I do love your work when you talk more about resilience. And it's like, how do you make your body more resilient and try to, of course we can try to avoid some of the toxins, but also how do we help our bodies get rid of them better?
Yeah. Oh, the way to my heart. That's my favorite subject.
Hermes.
So, that's right. So I love the title of your new book, Hashimoto's Food Pharmacology. And you're specifically getting at this sort of food as medicine, sort of like the old Hippocrates quote that we're all so familiar with. I love that you're doing that, because it's still, unfortunately, I think it still needs to be reframed for people that food can be absolutely medicinal. And there are a wide range of different things, different conditions and symptoms, and areas where specific food nutrients can be as potent or even more potent than pharmaceutical drugs. And there's a real lack of awareness around that subject. So I just love what you're doing. The whole concept of the book, I think, is phenomenal. How did you come to this idea of this book? How did this sort of idea get spawned, and what led you to create this?
So I became a pharmacist because I was fascinated with how tiny substances can impact our bodies. And you can take, 100 milligrams of a pill and make a 200-pound man drop his entire blood pressure in his entire body.
Mm-hmm.
And that's quite impressive. And you can take the same man and give him micrograms of a substance like LSD, and that person will start hallucinating.
Mm-hmm.
And that was why I became a pharmacist. And I was just so fascinated and looking for, how can I find the next cure? What medication is out there that can really transform a person? And how do I cure disease? And that's really was my goal, was to find a new cure and help people cure their diseases. Unfortunately, when I got into the real world, it wasn't quite like that. It was like, yes, I was giving people medications, but they just didn't have the profound effects that I would be hoping for, with a few exceptions. Of course, if you have a terrible infection and you take an antibiotic, then yes, you end up with a cure.
Yeah.
But in most cases, it was like, you take this one pill, and this pill is telling your body to do this, right? But then everything else in the environment is telling the body to do this. And then we end up being out of balance. And for example, with Hashimoto's, we have thyroid hormone, and we take the thyroid hormone, and it's great. And it's it's giving us body more of this hormone that we're not able to make. But then we've got these other messages in our body that are saying, go destroy the thyroid, right? And so then we end up with a deficiency in thyroid hormone again, because something is telling us to destroy the thyroid gland. And we're not getting enough of those messages that are saying, stop destroying the thyroid gland and heal the thyroid gland and heal the inflammation in your joints. And so I wanted to really kind of make people aware that it wasn't just medicines that had these potent effects on the body. nutrients can have the potent effects, and so can foods. And that's how I came up with the food pharmacology concept, was really giving people this I guess, knowledge and awareness that everything in our environment is going to be contributing to our healing, not just the medications. And we should use everything that we can to our advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that in mind, let's talk some specifics. So and we'll start with maybe the positive side of what do you think some of the most beneficial foods are for people with Hashimoto's?
So I kind of, I'm a nerd, and I used to work in outcomes research as well. And so there are things that I found to be helpful, but it's always, you never know, like, is it just helping me? Am I just an oddball? And then there are things that were helping my clients. And then I started keeping the outcomes for that. And then I decided, well, I have more readers than I could possibly ever see as clients. Let me track down some of these outcomes and results. And I found there were some specific things that a lot of people found beneficial. Two really beneficial things, super easy to incorporate into your life, are going to be bone broth and then green smoothies. Now, with bone broth, we're going to see improvements in people's hair, and skin, which are two really big things that people complain about when they have thyroid disease. They'll say, my skin just looks really dry, or my hair's falling out. They're also going to see improvements in joint pain, where they're no longer going to be having as much pain as they did in their bodies. What's really, really amazing is that people with so I compared like how responsive people were to medications versus like to bone broth. And with medications, about 40 to 70% of people would say that medications make them feel better, right? When they take thyroid hormone medications, which are great. And, you should definitely take the right ones for you. But with bone broth, about 70% of people said that was significantly helpful for them. And wow. So they saw improvements in energy, in mood. And it's kind of amazing because some of these parameters, I was like, wow, people were more energized by bone broth than they were by certain thyroid medications. And I just think that's super powerful. If you can take a food that's super easy to make and just incorporate it into your daily routine. It's tasty. It's great for a lot of different parts of your body, and utilize that to your benefit. And then green smoothies. So a lot of times we'll see people have trouble with digesting things when they have Hashimoto's. Part of that is the deficiency of thyroid hormone. Part of that is the autoimmune process. And when they start blending up their foods into a smoothie, they get a nice kick of nutrients that are available to them right away. And two, they don't have to digest everything, because digestion can be a hard process on their bodies. And with green smoothies, we see improvements. Again, in energy was 82%, 60% had better mood, and then 40% noticed that, maybe they weren't trying to lose weight, but their weights kind of started to normalize. And I love that when you're not like really putting pressure on yourself, when you can just add these things into your life that are easy to make and delicious, because you can just pop a bunch of stuff in a blender and be on your way with breakfast and lunch.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any thoughts on, while we're on the subject of green smoothies, do you have any thoughts on key ingredients to put in those smoothies?
I have my root cause green smoothie that I really love. That is going to be a mix of good fats. So I'll put avocado, coconut milk in there, and then chia seeds, depending on what people can tolerate. I'll also add some green veggies. So something like something like a lettuce that is not currently infected with, whatever the bad strain of E. coli is, would be really great to have in there. Also, carrots, cucumbers, celery are some options, kind of depending on what you like. And then I'll put 1 serving or so of berries. Blueberries are especially great for thyroid. They contain a substance called myo-inositol, which when studied by itself has been shown to actually normalize thyroid function in people who have a slightly underactive thyroid. And I love to use protein powders. I use a hypoallergenic one that's hydrolyzed beef protein. that is hypoallergenic for most people with Hashimoto's. I personally used to use a lot of whey protein, but we'll get into some of the inflammatory foods for people with Hashimoto's, and unfortunately whey is one of them. So we need to go with more clean protein sources like pea or hydrolyzed beef protein in that case. And that's kind of that. And different people might add different ingredients, make it thicker, thinner, might add ice, depending on what their palates like and crave that particular day.
Gotcha. What do you think of cruciferous vegetables? And I know that this is a sort of a hot topic in the hypothyroidism community, and there's a lot of mixed opinions out there. What's your take on the research?
When I first was diagnosed with Hashimoto's, it was like the recommendations were like, have a bunch of coconut oil, right? And then, and do not eat broccoli. God forbid you eat broccoli, because that'll just destroy your thyroid. And I followed that for a while, and I was like, yeah. And I added Brazil nuts. That was another recommendation. I was like, yeah, no difference here, right? And looking deeper into the research, the cruciferous vegetables are prohibited by some older references for thyroid disease because they are considered to be goitrogens. Now, goitrogen is kind of a broad term when you look into it. And what it basically means is a substance that could interfere with thyroid function. And there are, dozens of different ways that have been described in which a substance can do that. And some of the ways are through inhibiting the absorption of iodine into the thyroid gland. This is how broccoli and cauliflower can potentially interfere with thyroid function. Now, this can be a huge deal if you're iodine deficient. Now, remember what I said is now we have iodized salt, so most people do not develop iodine deficiency hypothyroidism. Therefore, the broccolis and all those vegetables should not be an issue for them. And what's more important is even if they are iodine deficient, which I would estimate less than 10% of people with Hashimoto's are, they can actually just steam or ferment the vegetables and they could still eat them and be just fine with them. There is one caveat though. In people who have SIBO, which tends to be more common in Hashimoto's, and people with the CBS gene mutation that's upregulated, they may have adverse reactions to some of the crucifers, but that's through different mechanisms. The one goitrogen that I do worry about is soy, and that interferes with thyroid function in a different way. It actually interferes with the thyroid peroxidase enzyme, which is basically the enzyme that a lot of us can have antibodies towards. And so there is some connection between soy intake and higher levels of thyroid peroxidase enzyme antibodies or thyroid peroxidase antibodies. So therefore that would be one particular goitrogen that I would avoid, but again, it's like a different mechanism. You're comparing apples to oranges. I know it's a little bit nerdy. I have a breakdown of it on my website and in my book if anybody's like interested in going through all the details.
Nice. So soy sounds like something that's not on your recommended list. Does that include all soy products or like more the sort of standard soy products? Does it also include things like tempeh and the fermented soy products?
Unfortunately, soy tends to be a common food that people are going to be sensitized to. And, I think fermented soy or miso, if that's what you grew up eating and you never ever had the kind of crap soy that's out there, then you might be fine with it. But there's a really good chance that if you've been exposed to the soy that's present in our processed foods, if you're on this earth, then there's a good chance that you're unfortunately going to be sensitized to even the good types of soy. That's been my experience at least. And we find about 60% of people with Hashimoto's will respond with higher thyroid antibodies when they include soy in their diet. And excluding soy, they will have a lowered amount of thyroid antibodies. And another a symptom that correlates with that is anxiety. So and palpitations. So if you're somebody that is having anxiety or palpitations and you're eating a lot of soy, I would recommend that you try to eliminate it for 2 to 3 weeks and see if that changes for you.
Interesting. So what other foods have you found are really not very good for people with Hashimoto's?
So unfortunately, gluten is going to be a highly reactive food. In my outcomes research, 88% of people with Hashimoto's feel better gluten-free. And then another one is going to be dairy. So about 80% of people feel better dairy-free. And now I know a lot of times people will ask, what about raw dairy? Or what about this kind of dairy? And unfortunately, the proteins, if you're sensitized to dairy, are going to be similar enough where there's a good chance that you're going to react. The one exception is camel milk, because a lot of times people may be more likely to cross-react to goat's milk and sheep's milk. So people are always like, I can't have regular milk, but can I have can I have goat or sheep? And a lot of times they may react to those, but camel milk, small percentage of people will react to camel milk, and that seems to be tolerated by people with Hashimoto's more.
Interesting. Okay, so gluten and soy are out. What about grains more broadly?
Depending on the person. So in some cases, yes, we see people react to grains, especially corn. This is oftentimes going to be connected to people that have joint pain, and people that also have gut issues or irritable bowel syndrome-like issues. A lot of times we're going to find that grains could be part of their triggers.
Interesting. Okay, gluten, dairy, soy, grains, maybe not. And anything else that is worth mentioning there as sort of a major trigger food that people don't do well with?
Eggs, nuts, seeds, and nightshades can be some of the triggering foods. My book is based on not one specific dietary protocol. It's based on 3 helpful dietary protocols that I found for people with Hashimoto's. So there's an introduction diet that goes gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free. And then some people have a complete elimination of their symptoms and antibodies just by following this for 3 months. And this is something that, a lot of times we can start with, and it's pretty straightforward. We eat real food, and we can recover our health that way. For other people, they may need to dig deeper. And I have more of a paleo diet-like template where we start eliminating a few more foods to see which are reactive. And then the deepest diet is going to be based on a template of the autoimmune paleo diet, where we remove some of these additional foods. And I just want to say these diets are not meant to be like forever and ever. Like you do not eat these foods and you only eat these foods, because we want to make sure that we're figuring out what's causing inflammation in our bodies today, remove that for a time period, and then work on building that resilience, work on building back our body so that we could add the foods back in. Mm-hmm. So the cookbook is meant to grow with a person. And some people may need to start with a more restrictive diet, like let's say if they have a ton of symptoms and multiple autoimmune conditions. For others, they may be able just to cut out a few of the gluten, dairy, soy foods and see a complete revolution in their health.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that bit about, that these are not meant to be forever, because I feel like there's a lot of people getting stuck on extreme diets and developing, in some cases, kind of debilitating fears of the bad foods that they're not supposed to eat. And they end up, doing this very counterproductive thing of sort of remaining on this highly restrictive diet and don't realize that they're poisoning themselves with fear and neuroticism and anxiety around their eating habits so much that the anxiety is probably worse than the food that they're trying to avoid.
It's known as orthorexia, and actually happened to me when I was first trying to get myself better. And that's why I'm so passionate about teaching people to be their own nutrition gurus. And I'd never had an eating disorder in my life before, but people who have had eating disorders are at a greater risk for orthorexia as well. But I just thought, if I just took out more foods, I would be healed. And that's the absolute, it's very, very sad, because you lose your own intuitive ability to connect with food. And my goal is to really restore that for people. With my case, I was on the GAPS diet, and it was very heavy based in like nuts and seeds and all these other things. And I was losing weight. I was losing muscle mass. My skin was like gray and breaking out. And the issue was that I was reacting to nuts, and I was eating a lot of those. And then there was like thousands of other foods that I wasn't reacting to, that I wasn't eating. And I was just like, no, I just need to stay on this. I just need to eliminate more foods. And the other issue was that I had some gut dysbiosis and issues that were causing me to not digest my foods properly. And therefore, I was being reactive to everything. So a big part of my healing was healing my gut and figuring out that I needed to actually add more foods back in to give myself some of that diversity and adding digestive enzymes and adding certain nutrients that I was missing. And, really that's my hope with this book, is to give people that ability to connect with their bodies so that they can start eating in more of an intuitive way and being able to tolerate a lot more foods.
Yeah. With that in mind, to get very specific and sort of practical, let's say somebody hears this, somebody has no clue what they should be eating right now, and they're listening to this and they're hearing, okay, I should avoid gluten, I should avoid dairy, I should avoid soy, and then I'm good to go. Maybe I replace my iodized salt with regular sea salt that's non-iodized. Is that enough for me? Is that like, am I pretty much good if I've modified my diet doing those things, or is there more things? Are there more things that I need to learn?
I think that's a really great start, to cut out some of the top inflammatory foods, and that you'd be doing that by cutting those out. But I also would want to look at the person as a whole. So we talked about some of the other additional triggers. And for some people, it's just gluten. That's the only trigger that they have, and gluten is going to cause all these other events. But unfortunately, those are my easy cases, and most people don't seem to be easy cases, at least not the people I've had the last few years. A lot of times it's a bit more complicated, where they might have problems with sleep. Sleep apnea is going to be a huge thing that can trigger thyroid disease and exacerbate thyroid disease. So if you are eating a really great diet, but you're still not sleeping and you're not breathing at night, then, that's something you need to address. My kind of rule of thumb is, if you've been on a clean diet for more than 3 months, and if you're still having symptoms, there's definitely something else going on that you need to address. And that might be your stress response. That might be some infection that you might have. That might be a toxin. And I kind of say this jokingly, but sometimes it might be a person in your life, right? So if you have a person that is causing you a lot of stress in your life, or a situation that's causing you a lot of stress, even eating the healthiest diet, you're still going to be suffering and you're still going to struggle.
You need to treat them as any other toxin.
Exactly. Yeah. We can get rid of a lot of symptoms by getting rid of inflammatory foods, and getting rid of inflammatory people works probably even better.
Nice. So, of course, people want to know what you eat personally. So, and maybe what some of your favorite recipes are. So can you take people through maybe a typical day of eating for you, and maybe one or two of your favorite recipes?
So I'm a new mom, so I like to keep it super simple. And I start off my day with a green smoothie. And that's just something that gets made in a few minutes, and the baby gets a little bit of his own little smoothie version. And then I like to put a little bit of bone broth on a slow cooker. So I just throw in chicken legs or chicken drumsticks with celery, onions and carrots, and top that off with water, some sea salt, apple cider vinegar, and slow cook that. And I sip on that throughout the day. The baby gets a little bit of that throughout the day as well. And then that kind of gets me through breakfast, right? And then I'll have a little bit of bone broth throughout the day. Then for lunch, I like to have different types of either salads or some sort of leftovers that I made the day before. For dinner, it's going to be generally something like a protein with a lot of really good vegetables and a good fat. Lately, I've been doing a lot of slow cooker recipes, and my goal for people is like not to make life even more complicated for them when they're already sick and tired, right? Yeah. So a lot of my recipes are going to be things you can make on weeknights, and really quickly, and batch cooking and slow cooking, and just utilizing whatever tools you have to make life a little bit easier. About 20% will be like more fancy for dinner parties, but one of the things you can do is like a chicken tandoori recipe that's in the slow cooker. So you just throw in some chicken and some coconut milk and some different types of curry spices, and let that slow cook. Super, super easy, super tasty. I serve it for my friends who are chefs, and they're always like super impressed. And I'm like, yeah, I just had that cooking all day, and I took a nap. It was amazing.
Nice.
That's one of my favorites. A shepherd's pie. We have a paleo version of it that's been a really great go-to, because you could just make a whole bunch of it and have it throughout different meals and snacks. It's very nice and comforting, especially in the winter. I know you guys don't have that in San Diego, but here in Colorado,
actually, we've had it's raining right now, and it's been stormy and rainy for like a week straight. So, but our winter is like pretty mild sissy winter compared to Colorado winter.
Yeah, it's been real. We've got a lot of sunshine though, but we'll be like, okay, now you wake up and there's a foot of snow. Paella is another fun recipe that I have in there. Again, it's something that can be made in like 20 to 30 minutes altogether. Serves a big party, and you get a lot of leftovers. And I also have a lot of traditional Polish recipes that have been modified.
I like that. It's almost like a tribute to your ancestry.
It's amazing because a lot of these healing foods are things that my grandmother would make, and they're real foods. They're nutrient dense and powerful. They have powerful healing capacities. One of them is a beet soup. We know that beets support methylation and support detoxification, and that's something that's really tasty, and I've made it really easy. My grandmother would cook it for like 6 hours by peeling everything and chopping it super fine, and I just like throw things in there, and it still tastes really, really good.
Nice. Do you have some recipes for gluten-free pierogies?
That's going to be the next cookbook. But yeah, actually my mom and I are working on a gluten-free pierogi recipe.
Nice.
So anybody that is going to be coming to visit Thyroid Pharmacist and getting on my email list will be the first to know.
Excellent. So thank you so much for this interview. I've really, really enjoyed it. And I'm super excited for the release of your new book. When does it actually get released?
March 26th.
Okay, awesome. And where do you want to direct people to get this book?
Anywhere that books are sold. Barnes and Noble is great, and Amazon always has special deals on it where they'll discount it and you can get it in 2 days if you have Amazon Prime, that sort of thing. So, and definitely it'll be in stores all over. So if you happen to be in a store, take a picture, send me a selfie. I'd be very excited to see you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Wentz. Really a pleasure always to connect with you. And I wish you an amazing book launch, and I'll be supporting you and helping you get the word out. So I know your last one was massively successful. So I hope this one is as successful or even more.
Thank you so much for your kind words, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing in the world. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. The feeling is so mutual. So it's such a pleasure. Thanks so much, Dr. Wentz.
Thank you, Ari.
Hey there, this is Ari again. One more quick thing before you go. Just make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Energy Blueprint, and also make sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, whether that's iTunes or Stitcher or anything else. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview, and I will see you again next week.